Hello friends, today I want to answer this question. Who pays the homeowner's insurance on a land contract? Well, by the end of this video, you'll know specifically who is responsible for homeowner's insurance and the best practices to know that both parties are protected. Have you ever wondered who should even cover the homeowner's insurance on a land contract? Curious about the potential risks and how to handle them? Well, let's dive into this topic by first explaining what land contracts are and the components involved in a land contract. Secondly, I'll talk about the benefits of a land contract to both the buyer and the seller. And finally, explain who is ultimately responsible for the homeowner's insurance in a land contract. If you are ready, let's go. So a land contract is a seller financing agreement that many times is utilized when a buyer cannot get a traditional loan with a bank or other lending institution. So why would a buyer want to engage in a land contract? Well, it's definitely an alternative. Let's say that there's a buyer out there that really wants to own a home, but a couple of scenarios have happened. Maybe they don't have enough money for a down payment. Maybe they've had some things that have hit their credit over the last little bit. Maybe they don't have enough credit history. Maybe they're a business owner that tries to make their income look really low on their taxes. But when they go to get a loan, the bank says, listen, you're not showing enough income for us to justify you getting a loan because your debt to income ratio is too low. So there's a lot of scenarios that you could play out where as a buyer, a land contract could be a really great tool to help you utilize getting into a home when a traditional mortgage is out the window. So what are the mechanics specifically in a land contract? So number one, you have the sales price of the property, right? That's negotiated between buyer and seller, or any other real estate purchase and sales agreement would fall under that as well. Now, you're also going to negotiate an interest rate. Now, here's the interesting thing about an interest rate when it comes to a land contract. Traditionally, the interest rate within a land contract is going to be higher than a traditional mortgage, and it could be 2, 3, or 4% higher just because they're not able to get a traditional loan, and there's a lot of risk that falls on the seller to be able to give a loan and to sell a property to somebody and finance that property for somebody that isn't credit worthy for a bank. So there's more risk involved on the seller. So increasing that interest rate is something that typically happens within a land contract. Down payment amount. This is also something that's completely negotiated. A lot of times when you get a traditional mortgage, the bank's going to say, hey, it's a 10%, 20%, 30% down payment is what we require. Because your debt to income ratio shows that if you have this much debt out there, it doesn't work for us. So you need to put down a greater down payment. Honestly, in a land contract, the buyer and seller could agree on no down payment. And many times I've seen that happen. The other component that's important is the amount due if there's a balloon payment. Now, traditionally with a land contract, the person, it's mortgaged out for 30 years, 15 or 30 years, and they make their payment every single month. And by the time of their last payment, the property's paid off and ownership is then transferred at that moment. However, setting up a land contract, it might be amortized over 30 years, but there might be a balloon payment after 10 years. Now, what that means is that after 10 years, the entire balance that is due has to be paid to the seller. Many times, by that period of time down the road, the buyer is able to get a traditional loan and refinance it, helping them get a lower payment, but paying off the remaining balance to the seller. Another important piece of it is something called equitable title, and it's beneficial for the buyer. This is going to put in place that the seller cannot go out and sell this property to a third party, or the seller can't go out and get liens against the property because that equitable title will prevent him from doing so. Also detailed out in the components is who's responsible for what, rights and responsibilities, which I will talk on in just a few minutes. There needs to be a component that there's assurances that there's no taxes or liens owned on the property. Another important component is a default clause. What happens if the buyer defaults on making payments? What is going to be the process? How's that going to work out? And then obviously requirements to record the land contract with the correct government agency. So what are the benefits to a seller in a land contract? Well, to be completely honest, a land contract is mostly beneficial to the seller. And as a seller, it gives you more flexibility. You can negotiate prices, you can negotiate interest rates, so you can potentially make more money. You can close on a piece of property much faster than a traditional loan. Also, one of the main benefits to the seller in a land contract is if the buyer does default on the property under a land contract, because you're not the bank, you don't have to foreclose on the property, which is very tedious and includes a lot of legal work to get that done. But because it's a land contract, if they default, you can evict them from the property, which saves you so much time and brain damage. And that alone is probably the biggest benefit of a land contract to the seller. Because it's so geared towards seller, what are the benefits to a buyer? Well, obviously the buyer is able to get into a property and own it and purchase it with very little money down and not needing to utilize a bank which means they don't have to utilize credit history, and they're not worrying about the bank deciding if they're credit worthy or not. And closing costs are obviously much lower as well, and that's a benefit to the buyer. Now, as you can see, the benefits are really skewed towards the seller, and they should be, right? Because the seller is taking on a much bigger risk than maybe the bank would, because they are loaning money or becoming the bank and financing the property to somebody who maybe would be a greater risk of defaulting than if they went through a traditional mortgage. And here's the important question. Who is responsible for the homeowner's insurance, and why is that important to have on a home in a land contract? First and foremost, the buyer is responsible for homeowner's insurance, taxes, maintenance, and repairs. They are the homeowner. They're living in the home, just like a traditional mortgage. If you were to buy a home and the bank was willing to finance it for you, you are required to have homeowner's insurance. And if you don't pay your taxes, guess what happens? It's going to be foreclosed upon, or there's going to be a tax sale on a tax lien or tax deed, and you're going to end up without the property or needing to pay that along with interest on top of it. And just like a traditional mortgage, the seller should require and can require that the buyer get homeowner's insurance. So let's run through a couple scenarios really quick. If the seller doesn't have insurance on the property and he sells it through a land contract and the buyer buys the property, and let's say the buyer doesn't get homeowner's insurance, and I'm looking right now in the Midwest is where I'm buying homes. And if you know anything about the Midwest, it's also called Tornado Alley. Let's say that a tornado goes through a town and destroys the home completely. If there's no insurance, guess what? The seller is completely out of luck. And that would be one of the worst scenarios to be in if you're the seller. So requiring that is really important. And proof of insurance can also be required and detailed out in the land contract. And if the same scenario were to play out and there is homeowner's insurance, obviously everybody's covered. Now, there's definitely scenarios under land contract where it is negotiated that the seller pay for the homeowner's insurance until the title completely switches once the last payment is made. But a majority of the time, it is the buyer's responsibility to get homeowner's insurance on the property. Because if they don't, that could be considered a default on the property, and all the payments that the buyer made prior to that could be kept by the seller, and he could evict them from the property. But to protect yourself, you definitely need to require the buyer to have homeowner's insurance. And I would imagine that if they are buying the home and it's their home, that they would want homeowner's insurance too. But you never know, right? Somebody might say, listen, I can't afford everything. I might need to forego paying something. But they got to pay taxes because that's important. They've got to pay homeowner's insurance. That's important. But they might say, I might forego paying the homeowner's insurance. That's why detailing out in the land contract, being specific that you need to see proof of it. And if they don't, that is considered a default. That's going to put that on the very high end of their responsibility list. And most times really force them into getting homeowner's insurance, because the last thing you want to be as a seller is to have a situation where you are seller financing the home to somebody under a land contract and there's no insurance on the property and something bad happens. Now, these are things that I've seen work really well when it comes to doing land contracts, and I'd be interested in your feedback on land contracts. So please comment below, let's engage in a dialogue. And as always, just for stopping by and watching this video, I've got a free gift for you. It's on this link below, aaronsfreetraining.com. It is a short-term rental calculator where you put in all the input of the purchase price, the income, the expense, and it spits out to you whether it's a good deal or not. And it's 100% free, no obligation. Once again, thanks for stopping by. Have an amazing day.